Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here. Welcome to our panel, Caste, Activism, and Cinema, What Comes After Visibility. I want to begin by acknowledging that this is not an easy conversation. Caste is layered, intimate, and deeply political. For some of us, it is a lived reality, and for others, it may feel uncomfortable. My hope is that we can hold this space with generosity, allowing complexity and nuance. At a place like the Harvard Kennedy School, where we think so deeply about institutions, governance, and systems, it feels especially important to ask, where does caste sit in those systems? Whose realities shape how we define democracy, justice, and representation? And when caste becomes visible in public discourse, through activism, or through storytelling, or through cinema, what shifts? Visibility matters, and being seen matters, and this panel is asking a forward-looking question. Once caste is visible, what comes next? How do we move from recognition to structural change? From representation to redistribution, and from story to transformation? Before we continue, a small logistical note. Because this is a sensitive conversation, we kindly ask that you do not record on your personal devices. We want to ensure that remarks are not taken out of context. The India Conference at Harvard Kennedy School is officially recording the session, and the recording will be shared with attendees afterwards if you'd like to revisit it. I'm deeply honored to introduce our speakers. Shazia Iqbal is a filmmaker and writer whose work thoughtfully examines power, identity, and marginalization. Her short film Bebak traveled to multiple international film festivals and opened up conversations around faith, gender, and resistance. She recently made her feature debut with Tarak 2, bringing questions of caste and social justice into mainstream Hindi cinema. Her storytelling bridges intimacy and politics in powerful ways. We're also joined by Thenmozhi Soundararajan, a Dalit American activist and the executive director of Equality Labs. She's an organizer and storyteller whose work has been central to advancing global conversations on caste equity. Through movement building, media, and institutional advocacy, she has helped create language and frameworks for understanding caste not as a relic of the past, but as a present-day human rights issue. Unfortunately, Bezwada Wilson has not been able to join us in person today. We're grateful, however, to share a recorded message from him. His lifelong leadership in the movement to eradicate manual scavenging reminds us that these conversations are not theoretical, but are about dignity, labor, and survival.
Friends, I am a Bezwada Wilson, National Convener of Safai Karmachari Andolan. Unfortunately, I am not there with you physically, but I congratulate organizers of Harvard India Conference 2026. And this is the time we need to review and reimagine in India. And this is really important for the India and even for the global. Because we all felt that we built the nation states and the nations got the freedom. But people have not got the freedom. That was still pending. But the nations also, nowadays it is losing their freedom. And there is too much dominance and too much exploitation which is continuing in the world. So actually our people who fought for the freedom so many years, almost like 100 years before, they were aimed something to see that the new India. But the new India is not emerged yet. We, the people, we have to struggle now for our freedom, our fraternity, our equality, justice, and the liberty. This is a struggle we need to continue even now. More than 100 years globally, the people fought against the colonialism and the imperialism. But the fascist forces made even to the people more powerless, and they started suspecting their own citizens in the globally. And this is a trend, it is a globally, and India has to take a stand, fight against imperialism, colonialism, caste and patriarchy, and all forms of the dominance, because we have a great history, and our civilization has made all of us to fight against all forms of the discrimination. With this experience, we have to lead the whole globe. Globally, we have to lead and make in the whole world as a society where all the citizens can enjoy within their own liberty, freedom, fraternity, as Baba Sahib Ambedkar said. Caste, cinema, and activism is interlinked and it is a more relevance today. Cinema is not just mere entertainment. Cinema has its own role to play and it can influence the society. But unfortunately, most of the mainstream media always neglected the caste and the patriarchy. And even if they want to show that, they will show a kind of in a very pathetic situation of the people who are somebody entering into the sewage or somebody is carrying the human excreta or some atrocity like, but never showed a fight against all these forms, never showed the resilience, never showed the struggles and the movements. These are the most important. The cinema is supposed to take it forward, and that can make a change in the society. And we are here to make changes. There is no doubt on that. We are the people. We have to fight against all forms of the discrimination and make a world better. That change is our main goal. And as a students, we have a responsibility to understand the world in the proper manner, and we must fight for the justice, we must fight for the freedom, and we have to make a change to the better society and the better world where we all must feel happily live and with the prosperity. Our dream should be, as a students, we must make a world where there must be a peace, there is a justice, and peace and justice and the fraternity must flow like a water everywhere in the globe. And that is the dream we must everybody have. Thank you.
Jai Bhim and Jai Savitri, everyone. My name is Thenmozhi Soundararajan, and it's a real honor to be here to have this conversation with Shazia Iqbal. And we are definitely feeling the absence of Bezwada ji today. He gave us a real masterclass in how to do the whole conversation of the panel in 4 minutes. But we'll do our best to deepen this conversation. But I think one of the questions that we really wanted to start off with is that in looking at the challenge of reimagining where we're going with Indian democracy, I think stories like the ones that you're telling, Shazia, and that many marginalized storytellers are telling now are so critical. And I think even the term visibility assumes that our stories are told and the problem is solved. But I was wondering if maybe you could just start off with us to help us understand what are the challenges of being able to make our stories visible? Because I think the production part, people really don't understand how even that's a hurdle.
Hello, good day, everyone. That's a great question to start with. I think the moment, at least in the Hindi film industry, where I come from, I've been working there for last 20 years. I used to be a production designer. And a lot of it has changed in terms of course, cinema has changed in last 20 years. We are getting better, even though there's a direct, because it's called Bollywood, there's a direct comparison with Hollywood. And, you kind of see what kind of cameras are coming in. So there's a direct comparison with, everything that happens in US. But what has not changed is the kind of, hidden, we don't talk about issues. We don't represent real people. And we did at one point, post-independence, our mainstream storytelling, Hindi storytelling had Naya Daur, had Dharmaputra, which basically spoke about the struggles of common people. And somewhere along the way in the late 90s, I think early 90s, that kind of just got erased. And we started selling dreams to people through our mainstream storytelling. And that is where I think as an industry we lost it. People in our industry are so scared of the word political that we don't realize that not being political is also political, right? So the moment you say you're going to tell a political story, people don't want to fund it, don't want to put money into it. And that's the biggest struggle. For us, we were doing adaptation of a story which, In Tamil Nadu, the mainstream politics is anti-caste. In Maharashtra, in Mumbai, in Bollywood, mainstream politics is basically to sell a dream. It's like advertising, right? When you see an advertising, there's a language, because I also come from advertising, there's a language which you say, oh, it should be ad film-like. Ad film-like basically means that you sell an aspirational story to people. You do not sell a story that people can relate to. What does storytelling do? Storytelling makes you relate, makes you evoke an emotion. Oh, is this about me? And then there are a lot of films that don't do that. It's like, oh, this is not me, but maybe if I get better, if I have a bigger house, if I have more money, then, it's basically telling the common people that there is no space for stories about you. And I think that's where the Hindi film industry lost in last 2 to 3 decades. And the struggle in production is about that. If you want to tell stories about marginalized community, about Muslims, about Dalits, about the tribal communities, there is no scope. People will already be like, oh, we are not going to go through with this, with censorship. Also, will people come to theaters to watch the film? And what has changed in last 6-7 years is the booming of OTT, which kind of has helped different kind of storytelling, but not enough for it to become mainstream. So there will be more, hard-hitting storytelling, like we would like to call it, on Netflix, on Amazon. But in the theatrical space, we are still looking at something that is non-political and something that is, there is a rise of nationalism and a nationalism that doesn't see everyone in last, I would say even much before COVID. And that's what it's done. It's basically hidden everything. It's made the marginalized, it's further marginalized people who were anyway invisible in Hindi film storytelling. And now there seems to be no space. And when we made our film, at least on the development and writing level, because we were also adapting an anti-caste film, there are two factors. One is internal censorship, one self-censorship, and one is external. And me and my writer, Rahul, who's also here, we decided that we are not going to censor ourselves while writing, but we had no idea the storm that was going to come at us once the film was ready. So I joke about it, that I can make 3 films on just clearance of this film, how much it took to, navigate and negotiate. You can say this, you can't say this. And I was personally shocked at the kind of things that we were told to not say. It's almost like there is an existing problem in the society, but we don't talk about it. And if we don't talk about it, it will go away. That's the attitude. And I think that's the biggest challenge. But it's at various levels. Like, see, filmmaking is a tough thing, even if you're not telling a story which is going to be a problem, right? It's 100 people get together and they have to follow a particular vision. There are 1,000 hurdles in making a film. And with the budgets crumbling after COVID, it's how do you convince someone that people are not going to theaters anymore? So I want to tell this particular story, and people will be like, no, but nobody wants to see this. So it becomes an OTT film. So there is bifurcation. Oh, is it a festival film? Is it a theatrical film? Is it an OTT film? And your most political films go to festivals. Somewhere in the middle goes to OTT, and your theatrical films actually doesn't represent many people. And all it's talking about is just celebration of the status quo, like very patriarchal stuff, very hyper-masculine stories, and just celebrating nationalism. And there is no other stories left now. And that's where the problem is. I don't want to call out those films right now, but the thing is, there is a lack of representation in those films that's going to the theaters. Because people are just worried that we need to bring people back to theater. So there are these, in Hollywood, there are these spectacle films, right? Superhero films. But there is, even though Martin Scorsese said that superhero films are not films, but there is some sort of storytelling. There is good storytelling happening there. In our theatrical films, I don't know. It's very debatable.
Yeah, I'm I'm really struck by what you're saying in terms of visibility, because I think for me, as a Dalit American, I think about the fact that visibility isn't a single state. Like, oh, we've come out of the closet as Dalit people and now we're visible. It's like a constant state of having to fight for the territory of being equal, and also our humanity and our dignity. And even as you speak to that truth, you still face violence and gaslighting. And I really think about this a lot because, you know, our organization, Equality Labs, we conducted one of the first surveys documenting caste in the United States. It's a very simple thing to happen in the United States. Racial groups conduct surveys on discrimination all the time. And we conducted this survey, and it was actually difficult every step of the way to do it. When we would table or we would call people, people would curse us out. You know, actually, we would go to different Indian grocery stores to then talk about the survey. People said, "You're dividing the community." One woman actually took out her shoe and said, "How dare you do this?" It was violence just to collect the data. Then we finally got the data, and then it was violence after that. And I remember even this one board to collect the data, they said, "Oh my gosh, we can't do this. Like, we're having an existential crisis. We have to have a board meeting to discuss doing the survey." And they said, "You know, Thenmozhi, if we do this, we will be splitting our community." And I said, "People who are Dalit in your organization are begging us to bring the survey there because they don't feel safe to tell you what's going on." So the quality of what it means to hold the space, to be empathetic witness to the violence, is one profound thing that I think storytellers offer. But then the violence in the distribution, the violence in the conversations that happen afterwards, I'm always reminded of Dr. Ambedkar's word that, you know, the story of the Indian subcontinent is one of revolution and counter-revolution. And so similarly, visibility will always be one that is welcomed by those that want to be seen, but also pushed back by those that are afraid of what happens when those voices enter the discourse. And that's really the challenge we have as artists, as storytellers, as organizers, as people who are thinking about development. We want to create an inclusive table, but an inclusive table is not always wanted by all. So how do we ensure that we create safe spaces in the face of that continuous violence, you know? And I guess, you know, knowing all of the journey that you went through for this film, like, what do you think are some of the urgent stories that need to be told now?
I think what is missing, I am talking specifically about the Hindi film industry because, of course, it's not a unified thing, you know, how the South works. Even though I think the entire wave of hyper-masculinity has come from the Tamil cinema and the Telugu cinema. And what is needed is, I would say, genre filmmaking. You know what Hollywood has done successfully, and I know there's a wave of horror films, but we've rediscovered horror genre as not something, like if you think about 30 years ago, we would think about creature features, right? About ghosts, and now what world cinema and Hollywood has done successfully is talk about the horrifying elements of humanity and our society, and used horror to talk about it. And I think that is what is probably needed more. I don't know if you guys have seen this Hindi film called Stree, which is basically, it's a feminist horror film, right? And I think we need more films like that to tackle about, like we talking about caste and gender in our film, but Stree also talks about gender, and it does it in a way where a lot of people are not even, you know, alarmed by it. Like, it will not go under censorship. Like, say, the very obvious political films will too. So they've successfully masked that. And I think we need those kind of storytelling that will, you know, probably evoke more than provoke people to take a stand. Because, I mean, of course, there has to be way for political films, but cinema is just a reflection and mirror of what is happening in the society. And the way Indian democracy is heading, I think we need films which are saying things but smartly. For example, in China and in Iran, I think these are the two countries that have faced very strict censorship for last 30, 40 years. And Iranian filmmakers especially have figured out a way, even though, of course, filmmakers like, I guess you guys would be knowing about Jafar Panahi, the Iranian filmmakers who was jailed. And they have managed to tell their stories last 40 years of religious regime, and they have managed to do that. In China, you cannot go into production without sharing your script with a party. And there are filmmakers whose films travel to different festivals, but they're never able to release it in the country. But they're still managing to make the films. I think we are very close to that back home in India, where scripts will start getting vetted at edit level, at script level, and we'll have to find a way to tell the stories. But what really helps is there's this Korean filmmaker called Bong Joon-ho. Parasite won some 4 Oscars, right? And he said it on stage that personal is political. I think personal stories really hit people, and they do not provoke, and they let you just listen to what they're trying to say. As long as your storytelling is dealing with a very personal story. See, if people have to get offended, they can really get offended with anything and everything. Like if I share details about what all our film was asked, like what all we were told to take out, you'll be like, oh, but there's nothing offensive about it. But that's how arbitrary it is when someone wants to censor your film. It's very arbitrary, right? It's not like, can I say one thing and it can offend you, but it might not offend you? And then how do you decide? There are a bunch of 6 or 7 people deciding for a 1.4 billion population what films they should be watching. That itself is a problem, right? So after that, I can just say, oh, I don't like the way this person walks from here to there, and that shot needs to be taken out. So that itself is an issue. So you just have to tell a story. I think the more personal it is, the more political it is, and you stick to that. I think genre is a great way of telling the story. Me and Rahul are going to go in that way of writing and directing, tell personal stories, but tell it in a way which is, and I'm not saying to take a stand to not offend anyone. I think if you're in the arts, you are challenging the status quo. We have to tell more stories about minorities. We have to talk more stories about caste. The attitude towards caste in the country is getting reflected in our cinema. It was so surprising that after people watched our film, there were so many people around and in the film industry, and they're like, oh, we had no idea this was still happening in society. And I was like, how come? Are you not like looking around, not watching news? But it's being blind to a problem, right? Oh, I have no idea this is happening, and it could be happening to the person sitting next to you. But you're completely blind because it's not happening to you. It's a very human tendency. So when we make films, what are we generally talking about, right? Forget about who we are representing. Basically, we try to study human condition, right? And we realized while making this film that people, when you don't face something, you're completely blind to it. And it needs so much of empathy and actually looking at, taking that stand that, oh, I have to go out of my way and see what that other person is going through. And it's completely absent. And the problem with the film industry is also about representation, because mostly there is a upper class, upper caste representation, and that's the reason that only those kind of stories are being told. And that needs to change for more stories to come out of, the rabbit hole. Yeah.
Yeah, there's definitely a political economy to film and who holds the means of production when it comes to film and books and literature. But I think one thing I take away from what you're sharing is that I feel that the kinds of stories we need right now are not just stories that put a mirror to our suffering, but also stories that actually invite the opportunity to heal. And this really kind of, stuck with me. And again, I'm going to answer this question both as a Dalit American and also as a South Asian American. I think and particularly as a Dalit feminist, for me, I feel like some of the stories that we need right now are stories that feature Dalit joy, celebration of life. And, as a Dalit author myself, one of the things I'm always struck by is that I feel like we're always digging the bones of the violence while other castes get to steal the stars. And I want to be able to imagine in the stars. It's part of the reasons why I've been working on a science fiction book, because I wanted to be able to center a narrative of healing and an adult feminist futurism that you don't often see, because we're still busy trying to prove caste exists. There's incredible harm and dehumanization, and it actually dehumanizes all of us, not just the caste oppressed. Because when you perpetuate that level of caste harm as a society, it actually diminishes and demeans you as well, So for me, I also want to see more Dalit feminist characters. I feel like even with anti-caste cinema, you often have protagonists that are cis men, but we don't see queer relationships. We don't see, we don't see the whole breadth of Dalit representation, which I would love to see. And then I think,
Can I say something?
Yes, please.
Halfway through our development process, when we already had like second, third draft of the film around that time, my co-writer Rahul, he actually said, shit, why can't we make a protagonist a Dalit woman? And we were adapting, of course, it was an adaptation, and it was the protagonist was a guy, but we were like, shit, can we use the opportunity? And you know what we thought? No one is going to fund it. So this is a genuine problem. I'll actually, if I can say, tell an anecdote. There was a script I had written, which was kind of based on my own life, because, early writers tend to take off from their life. And it was a female protagonist, and it was selected for a screenwriter's lab. And there was a pitching session where, you sell your stories to these major studios. And this was around 2016, and there was a studio, of course, I'm not going to name the studio, and they said, oh, you're a female director, and your protagonist is female. No one is going to put money in that. Right? And this is true for Hindi film industry. And it is still true. It is 2026 now. 10 years later, nothing has changed. So you can understand that people, good intention filmmakers are sitting with their, okay, let's make a superhero film. But you know what? Let it be a guy and not a girl, because no one is going to put money in that. So it's not the problem. It's not filmmakers are not writing these stories. It's just that you have to get it funded. It's an expensive art, right? You have to get it made, and you need money for that, and that's the problem.
Well, and I think this is why the Ambedkarite community has always created its own reservoirs of funding for its own work. Like, I always think about the fact that the annihilation of caste is made free by Ambedkarites for all other communities, simply because we knew it would not be published, right, at its time, and it's still a struggle sometimes. But I would say the other part of my response was around South Asian American representation, is that this is a tremendous time for South Asian Americans. I feel like we have not seen this level of racism even after 9/11. From the normalization of slurs to the targeting of the H-1B visa, and of course the incredible ICE actions that are happening in our community. I just came from Minnesota, and I saw some of the most horrific ICE activity against all immigrants. But it was the first time in the US that I had to go somewhere as a citizen, and I was told, you have to travel with a passport, because you can be pulled from ICE at any time. And in fact, I saw people being pulled from ICE, right? And I think about my father, because he was of the first generation to receive reservation. And that generation had this image of both India and also America, that democracy was ascendant. Here was the promise, especially at the end of World War II, we would have a new order with peace, where borders were stable and democratic process would hold fast. And in the face of dueling nationalisms and democracies that are in crisis, I think stories have a very valuable role in thinking about how we still come to the other side of this. And one framework I think that has really helped me is that we're simultaneously death doulas of a system that's in crisis, but also birth doulas for what comes next. And I think as Ambedkarites, I think our job is to take our commitment to the law and order, our commitment to equity, and begin to put in experiments that allow us to create continuity of Ambedkar's vision. Because his Carvel will go forward. You know, even though the nation state itself as a structure might feel fluid, I feel like we still want to honor human rights and that power, you know. So I know—
Can I ask you a
Yes.
question, Thenmozhi? Because in Hindi cinema, the thing is, if you don't acknowledge a problem, how do you go ahead, right? So there is a complete denial of caste issues in the country and in cinema. Is that similar when you started Equality Labs here? Did you face that, something similar, or?
It still exists, right? You can just look at online disinformation and you'll see, you know, a huge storm of transnational content that denies that caste exists. But I also think, you know, going back to our core tenet of visibility, despite the enormous gaslighting and disinformation and nationalist violence, you see caste-oppressed people and marginalized peoples saying we refuse to surrender our dignity. And I think when those that are marginal are saying our freedom and dignity are not negotiable, it actually changes the notion of the nation state that we're building. And certainly, as you saw in Minnesota, that you have the federal government attacking a state. And Minnesotans said, it's sub-zero temperature, not on our watch. And what they did is they led with love. They said, you won't take our neighbor. I'm going to sit there in sub-zero temperatures and accompany you. So you had white neighbors accompanying people like me and other brown and black people to their to church, to mosques. I never seen anything like that in my life, where people understood that a grave violence and a desecration of the rule of law was happening, and they said, we will still stand with peace and love. So I think that, you know, it's a time where it is tremendously frightening. And as you shared all the violence you face even in telling the stories, but sometimes a story is the shortest distance between two hearts. And that's why we still do it, right? Yeah. Well, I'm wondering for our audience, like how, you know, you mentioned a little bit with genre film. What are you thinking in terms of your hopes for genre? And like, what are you thinking about for some of your next projects, which you can share safely?
No, I was, you know, when you said what kind of stories are we looking for, I wanted to give example of Gully Boy. Because Gully Boy was, you guys must have seen it, most of y'all. Okay, so it talks about this rapper from Dharavi, who of course is a Muslim, Murad. And when I watched the film, I loved the film. Zoya Akhtar is one of my favorite filmmakers. But my thought was, oh, there was not very obvious tackling of Muslim issues. And it made me think that, is this the right way to portray a Muslim in Dharavi? And I've had a journey with Gully Boy. And I realized that we need more Gully Boys. Like, you know, we need to tell stories about people coming from marginalized communities. That doesn't always have to be about the issue that they're representing. It could just be a boy who wants to become a rapper and like real bad. Because, you know, what that makes us do is that makes us relate to them, because desires are relatable. We always don't know, like you wouldn't know what being a rapper is like, right? Becoming a rapper. But what we know is we all want to be something, and that's relatable. And that makes us relate to Murad, who is, you could be here in Boston and wanting to become a doctor, but you could relate to a guy who wants to become a rapper in Dharavi. So that's the power, you know, that's the power of storytelling. And that's the need of, you know, that's the kind of story I realized that, oh, you know, we need more mainstream films with names that are not heard, the Kapoors, the Malhotras, the Kumars. You know, we have to go into hearing different names. That is the politics of names, right, in India. So that is what is needed. And even if I make a superhero film, if I, and I just change the surname of the person, that's political. I don't need to go to a producer or a financer and say, oh, I want to tell the story of this person whose identity is this. It has to be merged where people feel like, oh, I'm on screen. Like one of the most significant things that happened, our film was not a huge success on box office. It did not make 1,000 crores. Unfortunately, really unfortunately, I think after Gajni, there is this 100 crore tag, and which is what is, kind of saying whether a Hindi film is successful or not. It was not an audience's, prerogative before Gajni whether a film earns 100 crores or not. You go to cinemas, you watch the film, you liked it or not, that was the interest. Now there's an entire online discussion, and it's happening everywhere, not just in India. Oh, this film has, earned this much money. That means it's a good film, which is such a sad state of affairs, right? Because a lot of good films are getting hidden because of that. And for me, my most successful feeling about making this film was the second weekend, there was this boy, a college-going boy, he DM'd me on Instagram saying, I come from the Dalit caste, and this is the first time in my life that I'm watching a Hindi film on big screen. It's important that it's on big screen. Theatrical films matter that way. This is the first time I'm watching myself on a big screen, and I'm crying my way through the film because of this. Because I never thought I'll see myself on the bigger screen. And that for me is a success story. I don't know how many 100 crores. I mean, if a film earns 100 crores, it doesn't go to people, right? You guys are giving the money to the producers. It's not, the filmmakers are not directly getting the money. The success story should be like, what has that film managed to do? Has it managed to have a bit of a social impact? It's a filmmaker's dream, right? That's the kind of social impact that we talk about. Our film was picked up by an NGO in UP, and they started screening the film in smaller towns, in Dalit villages, in Muslim villages. And there were screenings where there were 60, 70 people from the neighboring village that would come and watch the film. On like you could hardly see the screen. It's like a badly projected screen. It doesn't matter. But we have pictures of the way they are looking at the film, and that's a success story, right? That is what we are looking at.
Well, I think now we get to open up for questions. And I'm just curious if you could share a little bit about the question process. Are we taking 3 questions at a time?
Okay, amazing. We have mics at both the ends. Can I please request people to queue up there so everyone can hear your questions, since this is a multi-tiered audience? Thank you so much. Yes, the way we're going to do these questions is we are going to take questions in batches of 3, and we're going to answer them together. So quickly, one by one, y'all can, 3 people can go, and our panelists will be answering. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Arga. It was so nice to hear you guys talk. I had a little bit of a long question, but I'll be quick with it. So recently, I don't know if you guys know, there's a very famous writer from Gaza who was killed in an Israeli airstrike last year. His name is Rifat Alari. He spoke about, it was one of his old tweets, and he spoke about how Bollywood inspired resistance in the first Intifada. He specifically talked about Ammar Akbar, Antony, and Kuli. So we've come from that kind of a Bollywood to now, where in your film, in Taraktu, you have had 16 cuts, I believe. 60, yes. So this is just a personal curiosity. Were there any cuts that were personally close to your heart that you wish were there, if you can speak about it? And the second one is, I believe you had to mute caste slurs or political critique to not offend majoritarian sensibilities. So how do you navigate a system that is more focused on protecting feelings than showcasing lived realities? And the second one is, I think we as a diaspora are at a special place where we're able to access things that people back home can't. There's a Wire video that came out a couple of days ago that I can see from here, but people back in India can't. It's a satirical critique. So given that, as you have spoken, Indian filmmakers face funding issues, censorship constraint, how do you think the diaspora can play a role in ensuring that bold, socially conscious cinema is promoted, or how we can financially support them from here? Yeah. So.
And maybe, just for the clarification, each person should only give one question, okay? So that we can give full representation, but I'll let Shazia take that before we go next.
Amar Akbar Anthony is actually a great example because I've grown up on these films, right? I've learned so much about, how to be a good Indian from Bollywood of the 80s and 90s. And then at the time that I've started working on it, I have seen that shift where minorities are pushed aside and it's only about a singular feeling. The 16 cuts were extremely difficult. See, at the time a film is gone for censorship, for a filmmaker, a standard time that you spend on a film, if you're also writing it, as a writer, director, you've spent at least 3 years on a film, right? You sleep and you wake up with that film every day. And so if someone tells me, can I move this shot here? And I'll be like, no, no, we've gone through 50 edit cuts. Definitely there's not a chance that you can move it. And then you go to a, organization and they tell you that, you have to change this, you can't say this, you can't say that, this is offensive. And they give you the most bizarre reason for it. But largely, if I can say so openly, because I already have said it, the issue was there was a denial of caste discrimination in the country. So the first thing that was told to us was, this film is outdated. And I mean, if I could respond, I would be like, so they basically, they're saying that this used to happen in India, say 50 years ago, not anymore. And I was like, fine, but consider it a period film. But the whole thing was like, oh, this doesn't exist, you can't make a film about it, right? And there was also state elections that was going to happen around the time a film was being released. And films do have, Hindi films have a large reach. And there was a fear of that impacting the elections. And because of that, the cuts was so silly. Like because of SCST Atrocity Act, you're not allowed to, of course, use casteist slurs against someone. What they are using this as a rule, so if our boy, our protagonist in the film comes from the Chamar community, and of course, Chamar is a word that is used as a slur, right? So there was a scene where he is talking to the girl, the lead girl, and he tells her that, do you understand the problem of being from a Chamar community? And they asked us to censor that. It's like me coming here and saying, I'm a Muslim, but I am. You can't say that, oh, this is a slur and you can't use it, right? So they asked us to take that out. And it was shocking because things have to be seen in context, right? It can't be, he wasn't using that as a slur against someone. And in fact, there was a scene where the antagonist was using a slur against our boy. And even there, it was asked to censor it because you're not supposed to say it. But what about when people say it in real life? That is not getting censored, right? So what we are doing is we are hiding the reality in film to basically say, oh, this problem doesn't exist. And for me, it was like extremely emotional because, when you talk about storytelling, if I tell the story a certain way, Thenmozhi will make it and she'll tell it a certain way. And for me, that boy saying that I come from the Chamar community was extremely important. And it was not allowed to be said. Then you're taking my right away, you're taking my freedom of expression, right? And it was tough. And there was some very silly things like, there was a cop that hits the woman. I don't know how many of y'all have seen the film, but there's a cop that hits the protagonist's mother. And they asked her to take out a slap. And there are absolutely outrageous films where in the trailer of Hindi film, there's a recently released film where you're seeing a torture scene in a film's trailer. And that trailer is on the YouTube, and it can be seen by kids. And that is allowed. But a upper caste cop slapping a Dalit woman was taken out. So what we very smartly did, which was also, editor's idea, was basically we cut out the slap and we enhanced the sound in the edit. And in fact, it made the scene even more potent because the screen goes black and you just hear the slap and then people are like, oh, and it just ended up making the scene more emotionally potent. But overall, it was tough to, I was a first-time filmmaker, I've made short films before and this was the first feature. And the thing I think that they were scared of was a big, Dharma Production was the producer, right? And they were scared that because a big production house was making the film, we will get the visibility, the film will travel. Otherwise, if it's an independent film that's going to a Cannes or Berlin, honestly, no one is scared of films that go to festival because what they're really scared of is the impact on people in India, on the common people in India. It's staying in the villages, in the towns. They're not scared of someone watching it in Berlin, in Toronto, or at Cannes. What they're scared of, will this go and impact the elections? Will this have an impact on the electoral vote? That is the problem.
I will say, though, as someone who coordinated the Indian Film Festival of Los Angeles for many years, is that I do think audiences can make an impact by the festivals and other exhibition facilities here. Ask for caste as a protected category. Ask for representation of caste-oppressed and marginalized people in the bodies that are deciding what films get chosen, and ensure that we are able to create exhibition venues across the country, wherever you might be located, so that there's an audience for this. Because a film lives or dies by its ticket sales. And I think one thing, even here in the United States, people say is that caste-oppressed and marginalized stories do not sell. And I think Pa Ranjit has kind of blown that out of the water because Tamil people represent everywhere that we go. But I think we need to have that representation for all of us who are committed to a democratic India, But that said, I want to take one question from this side of the room. Yes, please, go ahead.
Hi. So she actually asked a version of the question I was going to ask. So I have a follow-up because, we were talking about all of these things that got taken out and censored in the film. As an artist, and as both of you, as artists and creators, and how do you draw the line of where you're willing to compromise? Because I'm also an artist, and I find it really hard sometimes to say yes to something that I know is going to be censored, right? Like, you going into this film probably knew that something was going to get censored.
Not really.
Really? Oh my God. If you had told me, I would have been like, girl, 5 years ago, I would have told you it's going to get censored. But
me too.
right. So
we started the film, we started writing it in 2022. So at that time, it wasn't as bad as it is now.
Yes. But as artists and creators, how do you decide where the line, and I'm sure that this is like a work in progress for you both in different phases of your lives and your creation. But yeah, where do you kind of draw the line? What's the cost-benefit analysis, the emotional, the social cost-benefit analysis for you?
See, the day we got the list of 16 cuts, it was 20 cuts, forward technical cuts, and it's very arbitrary, which is what I said earlier, because all the cuts were listed under a clause in censor board which says it will hurt India's freedom and sovereignty or something like that. It doesn't really mean anything if you really think about it, like all the cuts that I mentioned. There was a scene in the film, I hope you guys, it's on Netflix, please go and watch it so you'll get some context to what I'm saying. There's a scene in the film where our protagonist is a law student, right? So there is a jurisprudence class, which he goes and narrates it to people in his basti. And it's an anecdote that he's telling them, and that conversation gets converted into a caste conversation where his friends are like, oh, this particular person, there's a story, it's a subject, it's a law subject where, there are 5 explorers and they get lost and, they're stranded in a cave, so one of them gets eaten. And the friend says, oh, was he Dalit? And that's why he got eaten. And the other friend says, oh, then they wouldn't even touch him. And then that conversation, and then the other person says, oh, maybe he was, another caste. And then another woman says, oh, maybe he was a tribal. So it was entire conversation about a law subject was converted into a caste conversation. And so of course they wanted all the words to be, censored. They did not want us to say Bahujan. They didn't want us to say Dalit. And Adivasis they're okay with, because Adivasis, tribals in India, the most non-threatening, I think, group of people. They were okay with us using the word Adivasi. So in that scene, we had to censor everything. But the word Dalit, we said our protagonist is Dalit, and we fought for that word for 5 months. And I told them, we are not going to take the scene out. We are not going to take the word out. Because if that is out, the film is finished. I remember having a meeting with my producer and going and literally breaking down in front of them, because I told him I come from a marginalized community. I'm a Muslim woman. I know what it is like to be a minority in this country. What I'm being part of this right now, this negotiation that we were doing. We rewrote, we re-edited, we reshot to accommodate all of censor board's changes. And I said, right now I feel guilty of erasing, truth. And whatever happens, please let's not erase the word Dalit from this scene. And I think that is where I drew the line. And this is just example of one scene, but it happened in most of the cuts.
I would say, I'm going to answer this, and I know that we have to wrap our panel. So for me, the line has always been freedom, point blank. I think being a Dalit feminist, I have faced death threats. I have been physically assaulted. I've had my camera destroyed. And I still keep coming back to the table. And I want to bring back what Bezwada Wilson said, is that for us, the dream of what a free India looks like has not been imagined yet. And if we are really to move Ambedkar's Karva forward, we must actually bring our breath, our bones, our blood, our dreams to that spirit of freedom. And I think that ultimately, stories about caste are not stories about violence. They are stories about healing and love. And love is actually what we need to center the vision of a free India in. We have actually not experienced it. When we see the violence of caste, we see division, we see dehumanization. We have yet to untap the human capital that is possible when we actually look at the harms that have happened in the past and actually say, we are done with that. We want another way forward. And so I think artists have always been at the heart of the table of change, because you cannot push very radically different policies if people's hearts are not engaged. So I think that we tell the stories. We sing the songs for all who will listen. We bring the path of freedom wherever they come. And you'll be surprised. Ambedkar's Karva now looks like the way that we're going to shift the next vision of the next generation. So I think that we will face some suffering, but I also think there's deep opening, deep, profound wisdom, and also a possibility of spiritual friendship that we have yet to really feel. It starts in this room, but I want to see it take over the world. So Jai Bhim and Jai Savitri, everyone. Thank you for a wonderful panel.
Thank you, everyone, for being here. I hope this conversation has left us more informed and more attentive and more committed to imagining what becomes possible when activism, cinema, and policy begin to move together. I am aware that we've not taken all questions. If we have more questions, we are going to move with the speakers to the lobby, and we can take the questions there. And we're setting up the next panel here. That needs no introduction.